Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today we're talking about Dope Thief, the 8-episode limited series starring Brian Tyree Henry and Wagner Moura. It's streaming on Apple TV+. My guest is film editor Eric Litman. Eric, welcome to Below the Line.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk to both of you.
You have tipped my hand. For listeners, joining me in the co-host chair this week is Christopher Angel, longtime Hollywood editor and regular guest of the podcast. Chris, glad you could join us today.
Glad to be here. I apologize. I have a bit of a cold, so my voice might be scratchy, but I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, I don't think that's something I can fix in post, Chris. So you're just going to have to.
That's right.
Through.
It's not a filter. That's just what's happening.
It's going to give you some gravitas for more gravitas for the podcast.
Let me get this out there. A warning for listeners. Today's conversation will contain spoilers. Go watch the show. Come back, join us. Eric, give them a minute to do that, though. How did you get involved with this show?
I did a show a number of years prior for Hulu called Hot Zone Anthrax. And it was about the anthrax attacks in 2001. And I saw that it was doing in the trades. I saw that it was going to be Scott-free, Ridley Scott produced. Had some mutual friends on it. And I reached out to Scott-free, just expressed some interest in it. And a little trivia, I was an unpaid intern for Scott-free in the late 90s when I was still in school. And it was the time they were in post on Gladiator. So to come and work for Scott-free was sort of like it was a career milestone for me. 20 plus years later, I'm now on a relatively big show for Scott-free. I really hit it off with David Zucker, who's the head over there, and the producers on that show. And I just had such a great time. I thought our sensibilities were very similar in how we told story. We appreciated my work very much. And as most shows do, they come to an end. You say goodbye. You hope you work with the people again, but that's how our industry is. And then I went on to this other big giant show for Netflix called One Piece, which became a pretty big show. I'm on season 2 right now. And when I was finishing up season 1 of that show, I saw they were doing this show called Dope Thief. Ridley Scott was directing the pilot. Peter Craig, who I was a fan of his work, from The Town and The Batman, he was writing and producing, and I saw the star. I saw who was starring it: Brian Tyree Henry, Wagner Moura, and then it said Philadelphia, which I'm from.
Oh, okay.
And I went, oh my God, I have to do the show. I have to be involved in this. And I reached out to them. I reached out to David Zucker. As most things are in our industry, it was serendipitous. It was perfect timing. And he said, yeah, we're looking for somebody. And I took a few meetings, met with Peter Craig, met with the director, Marcel Said, and we were off to the races.
Well, that's an interesting take. So your in was through the company, but you still had to get, who did you have to actually sell on your work in order to get this job?
Because I had a relationship with David Zucker, I reached out to him. I said, hey, I'd really like to be involved in the show. And he said, yeah, we're taking meetings. We already have a few other editors on the show, but there's a spot open for episode 4. And I took a meeting with Peter Craig and some of the other producers, Richard Hughes, and we just had a conversation. We just talked. We talked about what we liked, what we didn't like, what we thought in terms of the script that I was being considered for. And it was just a casual conversation, just to see, where our creative sensibilities lie. And it was a great conversation. What was interesting about that is I was originally brought on to do just episode 4, and they were deep in production in Philadelphia. And when I finished the director's cut of that episode, the strikes had happened. So we sort of limped along the way and doing some editorial, but obviously we couldn't do as much as we wanted to do. So we ultimately shut down for a little bit. So at that point, I never really had an opportunity. I worked very closely at that point with my director, Marcella Said, some of the producers at Scott-free. But at that point, I never really had an opportunity to work with Peter Craig, which was a huge bummer for me at the time. We had talked, but actually sit down in the cutting room, we hadn't done. So we were shut down for a few months. And then a number of months later, they brought me back once the strikes resolved. And I actually worked in person with Peter, met him in the cutting room. And we started looking over the episode, and he was very happy with it, but there were some things we wanted to address, some things we wanted to look at. And we just started doing the notes, and immediately I could see we were perfectly aligned with what we wanted to do. So, and it was like my first day working with him, and then we took lunch, and we just sat there, and we had lunch, and we just talked music, particularly our fondness of bands that we grew up with, that what we liked, and we just hit it off in a very friendly way. He's a big Dodger fan. Being from Philadelphia, I was a big Phillies fan, and
I'm surprised he let you in the room there.
Yeah, we've got all Dodgers fans here.
he let me in the room. Well, what's interesting about that is the Phillies and the Dodgers were in the playoffs at the time.
Watch out.
That'll bond you.
That was a little, he was very supportive, very friendly. We had some friendly ribbing back and forth as guys do over baseball, but it was fun. It was just a fun environment. I felt very creatively free to say what I was thinking, and it was very collaborative.
For listeners who might not know, Peter Gregg is the creator and showrunner of Dope Thief. And so then just kind of his overarching vision, directors doing certain episodes that you're working with and the specifics, but then again, his overarching vision for what the show is supposed to be.
Yeah, and up until that point, I really had worked close. I worked very closely with the director, Marcella, and then I worked very closely with the producers. So when I got in with Peter, it was really just sort of refining certain elements of the show. When I came back after the strikes, the story had not necessarily shifted, but it had become a little bit more. They had now time to really re-examine where we are. Production resumed, and certain aspects of the script, which was always there, but now have become more pointed. And we were trying to figure out how to, because at that point, I think 4.5 episodes had been shot. So we had the remainder of the series to go ahead and shoot. So this arc that has become more directed and pointed, now we were trying to figure out how to get that into the previous episodes. And we did reshoot some scenes to sort of address all that, added some ADR. Once I finished episode 4, then they asked me to do episode 7. I was thrilled because I was only brought on to do one episode. So they asked me to do episode 7, which when I read the script, I was like, I can't wait to do this. This is a great episode. And Marcella called me and we spoke about it. And she said, this is an editor's episode. What she was meaning is there were so many montages in that episode that the editing will really determine whether the episode whether we make it or break it with this episode. So no pressure.
Yeah, it's easy for a montage to spin out of control, I think, and lose your audience if not done with intent, I think. And I can see the challenge of this episode.
Yeah, with a montage, it's interesting. I'm going to say this because when I was in college, I was convinced, again, this was in the mid 90s, I was convinced I wanted to be a music video director. That's what I thought I wanted to do. MTV was like the thing at the time. Mark Romanek, David Fincher. I mean, these Spike Jonze, these were like idols of mine. Michel Gondry, and I loved these music videos. I just liked the idea of telling a story intercut with music videos. And I sort of realized as I went through more schooling, more career trajectory, I'm not sure. I don't think music video directing that really wasn't what I wanted to do. I thought I did, but I really didn't. I sort of got bit by the editor's bug, I guess. And I learned through I experimented with a number of editing software. I did some actual film editing. I loved the idea of manipulating images and juxtaposing one image to the next and how that tells a story. So flash forward, many years later to Dope Thief, these montages, I started thinking, well, I don't want this to be a music video. And that's the risk of doing a montage. I want to make sure we're telling story here. And because episode 7 had so many montages, because we were sort of recapping what each of our main players were doing so many months after the heist and what's happened to them. So it was a bit of a time jump. I wanted to make sure that each piece in each of these montages was telling the story. And the joke that me and my assistant had while we were doing this was this was our Rocky Four, which is just montage after montage. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge Rocky fan. I actually think Rocky Four is one of the best ones of the piece. But they are right on the cusp, in my opinion, of music video. They're still telling story, but it's a fine line for that. And I just wanted to make sure, especially with the Mina training montage, that we were really leaning into what has happened to her, where she's going, and how she's going to overcome all the pitfalls that have happened to her up until this point of the series.
And then if you could, just for the sort of technical side of me here, how did you work on this show? Like what were you given? You got dailies, did you have a script, and what editing software were you using, and how did you approach each episode?
Huge Avid guy. I've dabbled in a lot of editing software, Premiere, Final Cut Pro, Media 101, Discrete Edit, all those editing systems. But Avid for me is the key. And we were cutting on Avid, and because we were remote for a good portion of the show, and then we became hybrid, we were also using Evercast to communicate with when Marcella was in Philadelphia or when she went back to Paris, which is where she's from. We would run the show through Evercast.
Where were you physically editing?
I was in Los Angeles.
Okay.
They gave me a system in my home, and then I had a system in the Scott-free offices. Marcella would FaceTime me all the time, and we would talk about certain scenes. I would send her scenes, and we would talk about it. Extremely collaborative, and we would talk about what was working, what we felt what wasn't working. Maybe we need to pick something up. She had such a terrific eye that she's sort of like I think she came from an indie background. So she had a very run and gun mentality, and she would see things that weren't always necessarily planned, and she would grab it. We were able to utilize the stuff that she would shoot as transitions from scene to scene, or and I've talked about this in other panels that I've done. She shot these vultures in the big quarry sequence in episode 4. That wasn't planned. She just saw them there, and she calls me after the day she shot it, and she said, "Hey, we got all these vultures. I think it'd be really cool to use this. I'm not sure where, but see what you think." And I looked at all the footage. She got like 20 takes of vultures circling above the quarry. And it was beautiful because, Ray, played by Brian Tyree Henry, he walked up to the edge of this quarry before this big giant shootout. And he looks up and he sees the vulture. And it was sort of a metaphor about where he is in life and what's about to happen. And it just created this very poetic moment before this horrific event is about to happen. She was just great in grabbing stuff like that.
While we're on that episode for Corey's shootout, like that is really a very intense moment. I'd say through the series, very intense moment to focus on. So what do you end up with? You got, obviously, you just mentioned you got this footage of vultures, but then what else are they? I mean, was it days of filming on getting that done? Because there's a lot going on there.
I think, if I remember correctly, it was shot over the course of a few days. And it was shot in a way where you really could kind of go in a lot of different directions. But when I saw the footage of what was shot, and just to backtrack here, I've worked on a lot of action-oriented shows. I've cut a lot of fight sequences of various degrees, car chases, fist fights, gunfire, running and dodging bullets, stuff like that. And when I saw this sequence that was shot and the way I interpreted it when I read the script, it appeared to me of this is not a traditional action sequence that I would normally cut. Normally, when I cut, when I was at Marvel for a number of years, when I would cut those sequences, it was your main players directly involved in this fight, whatever that fight may be. And they're dodging the bullets, they're firing the guns, they're right there in the action. And when I saw the footage here and I saw where the story was going or leading up to at this point, I thought, well, I don't think these guys should be involved in this. I think they should be unwilling participants. And they're horrified by what is happening and how much this has really spiraled out of control for them. So I tried to keep everything at a distance of what they were witnessing. And as the fight of the shootout of the quarry was progressing, we're obviously keeping the fog of war, but as it was progressing, I wanted to, like layers of a quarry or layers of an onion, slowly reveal the jeopardy and the stakes that's happening in the sequence. So as we were progressing, we started to explain, well, there's snipers above them. So now they have that to contend with. But then we're constantly moving up and up and up, and they finally get out of that quarry sequence. But I sort of looked at it as layers of a quarry. And again, another little trivia, the quick shots we have of the snipers was something that Peter and I discussed when we eventually started working together about, do we need to explain where this gunfire is coming from, or can we just live in the confusion? And we thought if we shot just a few pieces of snipers, just to give the audience a little bit, just to ground them. But we didn't want to over-explain everything. We thought just a little bit would help so that we're not totally confused or disoriented. And I also say it was one of the first sequences I ever had where somebody actually lit himself on fire numerous times. So when I was seeing these dailies come in, I was overjoyed, but also like, holy cow, I can't believe what I'm looking at. This is pretty next level footage. And it was great. It was a lot of fun to cut. Also, what was fun about that is these horrific things are happening, like the guy dropping the Molotov cocktail and setting himself on fire. And then you were able to cut that with the reaction of Ray and Manny witnessing what is happening, and you're just seeing their faces. And that just made it even more horrific. So you didn't really have to linger on these horrible, violent shots. You can quick moments and then kind of pivot to who's watching this. And that just makes it even more horrific.
It's really interesting to hear because it is like horror, and there's also like a reversal of expectations in this scene, right? Like as you said, you go in expecting a big shootout and our guys are on top, and then it's all reversed by the end of the scene. And it sounds like you
It's
really
all reversed,
played that
yeah.
out. Yeah, that's great.
It was a challenge for me to do that because it was definitely something different than how I would normally cut a fight sequence. So that was very refreshing, as opposed to the sequence with Manny in the prison when he's fighting the guy in the prison in episode 7. That's a little different. That sequence was more. This is mono versus mono here, and I felt that one was more appropriate. And obviously, they're in a very small cell. That one was more POV centric. What's happening? We want to be with our character. We want to see what he's experiencing and how he's going to get out of this mess, or he doesn't get out of this mess. That's the question. As that short fight was happening, Manny versus one of the white supremacists in the prison cell. Again, another episode shot by Marcella. She shot this. I think it was GoPro footage of POV of what he was seeing as the punches were coming at him.
Ah, okay. Watching that, I noticed there's some grainy footage in there. You're saying that was actually shot on the GoPro and then
Yes.
just blown up. So that's okay. That's what explains where that's coming from.
Yeah, and so when I saw it, so Marcella called me and she said, "Hey, I shot all this stuff. I think it's interesting. Take a look. I'm not sure how you would use it." She has, I think this, she says, "I have some ideas, but I'd like to see what you think." And I was like, okay. So I take a look at it and I went, well, when I watched the footage, I went, it's very compelling. It's very interesting. I personally don't think we can live in these shots for long periods of time because of the different format. It's grainy and it might take you out of the scene if you play the whole majority of the fight in that. But then as I was putting the fight together, and it's a pretty violent fight, I started thinking, well, it'd be interesting if we use this footage as like flash frames, kind of like when a boxer gets punched in the face and you have that, you see stars. I thought that could potentially be interesting. And how do I incorporate this footage that's not the best quality, but utilize that downgraded quality to our benefit? So whenever Manny got punched, I would like triple cut the moment and I would utilize that grainy footage, that GoPro footage, as like his bell got rung, he's seeing stars. And I didn't know. I didn't, I wasn't sure when I was putting it together if this was going to work. And then when I put it all together and I looked at that fight, I was like, wow, this is such an interesting way to tell that story, to tell you that he's really at a disadvantage. He's getting pounded here. And when you intercut that with the guy smashing him in the face, he's winding up and he hits him, and then you intercut and you can like double cut or triple cut that moment, it makes it even more viscerally violent. I was thrilled with that fight sequence. I showed it to when I was in the cutting room. I showed it to some of the producers, and there was definitely people turning their heads, which made me very proud.
That's great. And yeah, it definitely had that tension of like, I really didn't expect him to survive. So somehow you built that into the editing of the scene as well. It was so graphic that I thought this has got to be the end. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and then there was two shots in there which were very violent, and I was like, or actually three. I was like, oh, I hope, because you don't, when you do a sequence like this, and it can go in many different directions, and I was hoping that the producers or the studio didn't want to pull back on the violence.
Mm.
Not because it was so gratuitous, or not because I wanted to be so gratuitous, but I felt it was important for the story. I felt it served where he was going and what was happening to him, so we could feel this all that ultimately what happens at the end is earned. It's important that he was being broken down systematically. Each event in this episode, Manny was slowly being broken down. That was an important sequence. So, him getting his face smashed against the wall and being slit, or biting the guy's ear, or just getting wailed on. I thought that ultimately served the story. And to the producer's credit and to Apple's credit, they pretty much left that scene as is.
And to that point of like sort of the bigger arc of these characters and the episodes, the series itself, right? There's 8 episodes and there's different directors, the different editors working on these episodes. How was it communicated to you, like where the arcs are? How did you study that up? How did you try to make sure this was consistent? Even though this was 7 we're talking about now is like kind of a special episode. We'll talk more about it, but how did you give it that consistent feel like this is the Dope Thief show, even though I'm only doing certain episodes?
Well, I'm a little, I'm a little different, I guess. Personally, I don't want to read the scripts beyond what I'm cutting. So when I first came onto the show, I was contracted out to do episode 4. So at that point, the first 3 episodes were in various stages of production or edits. So I watched those. I read 4, then I watched those episodes. One of the other editors on the show, Jennifer Barbeau, I had known for a number of years prior to all this. She did episode 2, and I called her and we spoke a little bit about how things were going, where the show, what was received well in her episode, what they didn't like. I really enjoyed all her temp score because I felt that it was really catchy. It was really capturing the vibe of, or the theme of where the show should be. She said that was received well. So, okay, great. I liked that. Billy Rich, I had known he cut the pilot, and I called him and we spoke very, very, very friendly, very generous. He's worked with Ridley Scott a number of times. And he told me, how things were going. So we talked about, and with both Jennifer and Billy, we talked about Ray and Manny and where we thought the show was going. So I cut episode 4, then we ultimately shut down. When I came back to do episode 7, and then ultimately I went back to take over episode 3, the strikes and all that people's schedules changed. So now I took over that episode. And the arc of the show didn't necessarily shift, it just became more pointed in where we were going. So now we had to sort of address that in the previous episodes. At this point, we had 6 episodes in various stages, and I decided to watch all of them. And I try not to read, again, I try not to read the script because once I see it or read the script, I'm never going to have an opportunity to be a fan. I like to see how I respond to a show as a fan. And obviously, I thought it was terrific. So I did eventually, I think I eventually had to read 8. Peter Craig wrote that script and directed it. And it was great. I was very jealous I didn't get to cut that one, but I needed to know where we were going in episode 7. So I did do that.
Because episode 7, as we alluded to it earlier, so there's a time jump from episode 6, and you're moving all the pieces around to get set up for what's going to be the finale with 8. You talked about the montages being a big part of that show. Were they scripted in detail, or is a montage something you sort of discover from the footage when you're working?
Well, they were scripted. In terms of the edit, no, there were specific beats that Peter had scripted that we wanted to make sure we hit. But it was sort of like this leads to this leads to this, and a big intercut, intercut this. That was pretty much the gist of it. So it allowed me to have creative freedom, I guess, in those sequences, which is a risk because you don't know how it may be received because you're sort of going out on a limb. Episode 7 and episode 4 in particular, 4 and 7 was the first time I always say, you let the material speak to you. That's how I sort of operate. But when on previous shows, whenever I say that, there's still beats, there's still things you want to hit. You're sort of operating on a subconscious level, but also on a conscious level of how you're putting together a scene. On Dope Thief, this was the first time that I relinquished control. And because, especially in episode 7, because there were so many montages, I just let the material speak to me, 100%. I would craft a scene. I had, again, with these montages, I wanted to make sure we were telling a story. I had an arc in my head about what I wanted to say in these montages to make sure we were understanding what was happening to that specific character. But rhythmically, I didn't overthink what I was trying to do. This naturally felt like it led to this and led to this and led to that. Again, it was to the credit of Marcelo's footage and the beats that were on the page that I was just subconsciously, I just let the material tell me what to do. When I watched these pieces all put together, I was a little nervous. I was like, well, it could be a total mess. That doesn't make any sense. Or, I hit the nail on the head. And when I saw it, I was like, wow, this is just terrific. I was so thrilled with what I put together. And to go to the sequence, the Mina training montage, I put all those pieces together, and then I went and grabbed some temp score from, I'm a huge Trent Reznor fan, and I grabbed temp score from the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And I put these scores in there just so that we could feel like everything was just to help us understand that this montage is one piece, and I put it all together, and the Mina training montage, the full montage, there's investigation, there's training, there's rehabilitation, there's character arc for Mina, of how she's going to become, because Mina at this point was very damaged. She didn't have a voice. She learned that her partner, who she was having an affair with, was kind of corrupt, and he was doing some pretty unsavory things, and he duped her. And now she's trying to redeem herself and solve what's happened. So there was a lot to tell in those montages. Again, it was a lot of fun. And then not that long ago, I was actually watching The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and I came across the cues that I used in the temp, and I realized, I might have subconsciously ripped off those sequences. But I will say, what's fun about that, because I love watching, I watch movies. People that know me will tell you, I watch movies over and over and over again. I enjoy it. I enjoy it. Good ones and bad ones. I enjoy doing all that. And what I try to invoke in my own work, things I love, from other people's work. I don't do it deliberately. It's always subconscious, but I will happily say I quote unquote subconsciously ripped off the girl with the dragon tattoo because it's just a fantastic edited movie. And also the other thing that I did is that when I took over episode three, we had to address certain things, where the characters were going, and the opening montage of three, we sort of rejiggered a little bit, and we took footage from various episodes to create a little mini montage of what has happened to Ray. Where is he? We found footage of Ray sleeping in the storage locker. This was all from various episodes. And what we did was is we put in some ADR, and Brian Tyree Henry actually came into the cutting room, recorded a whole bunch of ADR on our iPhone, and we cut it into the show. And what we did was is we utilized that opening shot of him waking up from like a fever dream of all the events that have led, of one and two that have led to this moment. And basically, he wakes up screaming, "Where are you, Manny?" And I put that together, and I realized, and I told Peter and some of the other producers I did this. I ripped off the sequence from The Fugitive when Harrison Ford jumps off the dam and then wakes up in the brush, and he realizes now he knows what he has to do. He has to solve the crime. He has to justify. He has to get redemption and prove his innocence. And I realized, because I watched that movie over and over and over again, I realized I completely ripped off that sequence. So I admitted that to Peter and some of the other producers, and I said, "Look, I did this subconsciously, but that movie had a lot of problems when it was being made, and I think it ultimately won an Academy Award for Best Editing. So if you're gonna rip off from the best, I guess."
Yeah. And then also, you grew up in Philadelphia, correct? And so this movie is very much about the city of Philadelphia, obviously, and the place. How, as an editor, do you channel that experience of growing up there and then kind of understanding what you're trying to portray?
Well, when I went for the interview, that was one of the things I kept telling them. I kept calling my agents and I said, "Tell them I'm from Philadelphia. Tell them I'm from Philadelphia." And I don't think that makes or breaks the edit, but while we were in post, they did go back and they shot a bunch of city footage that we could intercut from scene to scene to help us transition from different moments. And that was interesting. That those also became little mini montages. Where are we in the city? Are we in a good part of the city or a bad part of the city? What do we want to say? What's this train or subway that's going to pass through frame? What will that do for us in this moment? Is it going to create some urgency, or do we want to feel some some serenity? Ray and Manny going to their trial. They're in the prison bus, and to get us into that sequence, Ray is being wheeled out of the hospital, and he looks up at the sky, and he's looking around, and he's just having a moment of being outside and enjoying the sun. And just by chance, they saw some seagulls flying over the sky. And again, it just became another metaphor of what was happening to Ray in that moment. We could have just cut right to the bus, inside the bus, and went right into the scene. But what Marcella saw was there was some in that area, in the sequence where the bus is passing by, they saw plants and trees and puddles, and we were able to utilize that as a nice transition, just get us into this rather emotional scene between Ray and Manny. They had a deep love for each other. They were brothers, and this was, spoiler alert, this was their last interaction. It was a very emotionally charged scene. So by utilizing some of the footage they shot to get us into that scene and cutting it in a slower rhythm, it allowed that type of drama and emotion to it helped us transition into that type of feeling.
And that was a really interesting sequence because again, that moment of like peace and quiet and nature felt different than maybe some of the other stuff in the series. And then also, I don't know if this was a decision you made or if this was a decision in the script or in what was shot, but there was no aftermath of the actual hearing, which again, I think I expected because that's like a typical like movie moment. They're going and then you see the hearing and something goes wrong. But Was there a hearing shot, or what was the decision there?
It was never shot. It was never scripted, at least not in a script that I ever saw. I think the intent was we didn't really want to spend too much time on a hearing or trial. We wanted to focus on what's ultimately going to happen to our characters. We sort of know it's not going to work out for them legally. So there was no surprise there. We wanted to get on with it and really focus on the aftermath of what they've done and how that's affecting the people that Ray loves or Manny loves and what that ultimately is going to do to them. And that's how we sort of set up the big intercut montage at the end of episode 7.
When you were talking about the montage work, Eric, yeah, I mean, you've got practically four different storylines, maybe even more. Again, kind of, and trying to like all of them have tension. You're not sure how things are going to break. Let's talk about those scenes specifically and the approach that you took.
I wanted Ray to be the anchor of that intercut. I wanted to start with Ray and end with Ray. Manny at this point is broken, 100% broken. He knows his time is limited. He's not sure how. He just knows something bad's going to happen to him. He says goodbye to Sherry. His face is completely smashed up and bruised. And he's talking to Sherry. And he says goodbye to her. He tells her what to do in terms of get the money. And the approach was we wanted to feel this culmination of each character's event from intercut to intercut raises the stakes in jeopardy. And each sequence takes us to a higher tension. We kept building and building and building, and then we threw in the voice that's been tormenting Ray. And the voice was our way to keep this sequence feeling like it's all happening at once. At any moment, one of Ray's loved ones could be taken out. And this was all part of the mental torture that the voice was doing to Ray. We were building on all of that. And when we had Son in the prison, we deliberately tried to deceive the audience on who that was. We wanted you to feel that was Manny, that they were coming after Manny. And then when Son gets up and starts stabbing everybody, the two prisoners that are coming after him, we wanted that to sort of surprise the audience. But we also wanted you to sort of, for a quick minute or a quick beat, forget about Manny. So that way, when we come to the end and we reveal what ultimately does happen to Manny, that he unfortunately, again, spoiler alert, guys.
They were warned, Eric. Don't worry about them. They were warned up front. So yeah, go ahead, dive right in on it.
So when ultimately we reveal that he overdosed, we wanted people to be surprised by that. And we wanted it to be a surprise for Ray because he's being so tormented in that sequence. And he thinks they're coming for him. And when Michelle comes and she tells him, we dropped out all the sound, we dropped out all the music, and we just lived on Ray's face. We just let Ryan, who just gave a terrific performance, dictate the rhythm of that scene. When that sequence ends and he's talking about where is the ground? Are we falling? And he's really emotional about losing his brother that he's trauma bonded with for all these years. And he's starting to cry. And just as his eyes close is when I cut the black. It was a deliberate choice to have no music over all that. We just wanted to play the emptiness of how he felt. It's a sequence I'm extremely proud of.
I was taking by something you said earlier, which I think probably applies to this whole big sequence at the end, which is like you're sort of trying to let the material in this episode specifically guide you and tell you where to go. Can you tell me like how that works as an editor? Like you're sitting down, what do you sit down with? Are you the assistant editor? I assume is giving you dailies, and how is it organized? And are there multiple cameras? And then what do you do to try to let this material talk to you? Are you just watching it over and over again, or what do you do?
Well, yes, I watch it. I watch the footage a lot. It's a hard thing to explain, to be perfectly honest. You really just, I was just allowing the footage to say this from this piece to this piece. This is is to me the most interesting. Ray charging down the hallway towards the end of the elevator. He sees some dead bodies. He's hearing the voice. What I sort of did is I wanted to tell his journey of leaving his hospital bed to the elevator, intercut with all his loved ones in jeopardy. And he knows something terrible is about to happen to somebody. Just doesn't know who. And what I found interesting about that montage, back to speak about how I steal from, or I take inspiration from my other movies I love. I'm a huge Christopher Nolan fan, and I think the editing in some of his movies, or all his movies, is fantastic. I think he tells story in such a unique way. If you look at some of his montages, like in Dark Knight, when the Batmobile blows up and then the Batpod is driving around Gotham City. If you look at that short little mini montage in that sequence, if you look at it cut for cut, I don't think that Batman is ever in the same sequence, same location from shot to shot. But if you watch it as a whole, it's telling a very interesting story. That he's traveling, he's racing, he's trying to get to the Joker, and he's doing all these different things. But he's not, it's from cut to cut, if you really analyze it, it made zero sense. And to me, that is such a powerful way of telling a montage and story. You're relying entirely on the drama and the motion of the moment. And that's sort of how I approached a lot of the montages in episode 7. I just wanted the story to tell me what to do. It's an instinctual thing that sort of happens when you're cutting a sequence like that. I guess that's really the best way I could explain it.
Yeah, I think for people who are listening at home, like my takeaway, this is a very big picture, but listening to you and everything you've said here, it's like every sequence you're sort of approaching from a character point of view. And I think that's really important for editors to remember is that, yeah, this is about human beings. And like every time you sort of start talking about like what's motivating you, you're talking about in terms of Ray's character and the relationship to Manny and always coming back to these relationships. And I think that's what makes these montages work, right?
Well, yeah, there'll be two things. Story to me on every show that I work on is king. You can't argue with story. And then second to story would be character. Where are our characters going, and how does the character motivation and direction affect the story? Ray going down that hallway holding the scissors as a weapon, and all the intercuts of all his loved ones being affected as he's having this emotional journey down this hallway, which again is I guess you could say is a metaphor of what's going on in his head. He's walking to the end there, and the doors are going to open. He doesn't know what's on the other side. It's ultimately going to be bad news. And that's sort of how I was approaching that. So Michelle's in the parking lot. The lights turn on. She's in jeopardy. The inmates come after Son, but we don't know it's Son. We think it's Manny. That's building, and Ray is yelling, "Take me, take me! Don't take my friends," which was the subtext of what he's saying. He's saying, "Take me." And then we cut to Sherry in the storage locker. She's about to open the storage locker. Who's in the storage locker? Oh, it's Teresa. She's safe. And then, well, now who's in the prison? Is it me? No, it's Son. And Son kills these guys viciously. And then we get to Ray and the elevator, the doors open, and we think it's going to be the voice, but nope, it's Michelle. And he thinks he has to get her out of the hospital. And she says, "I have terrible news for you." And now we can reveal what's happened to Manny. And that's sort of how I approached that sequence.
Well, with Manny maybe being the exception, since we've identified his death at the end of your episode, I was surprised at the end of this, like how many people are still alive, truth be told. And I'm curious whether, I haven't read the book, is there more story to be told here? Do they intend on revisiting this world?
I don't know what their intentions are. Again, all Peter has to do is call me, on any show, and I'm there. Any show he wants to do, I'm there. I don't, we could do the Smurfs together as far as I'm concerned, and I'll happily do it. I don't know what the intention is for a season 2 for Dope Thief. I've come to the point right now where I really look to work with people that I collaborate really well with and want to tell the same type of stories as I do, and ultimately have fun doing it. That's generally how I'm looking at things now. I just want to work with my friends is ultimately what I enjoy doing, or working with people that will become friends.
Well, Eric, you teased earlier that you're working on the second season of One Piece now. That's the Netflix show, which, by the way, I enjoyed the first season of that quite a bit. Is there anything else we're going to see of yours before then, or is that the next work you've got on the horizon?
I've been on season 2 for One Piece for a while now. That'll be the next show that will be coming out. I'm not quite sure when it'll be coming out. Hopefully an announcement will be coming out relatively soon. I can't say too much about it. Otherwise, all I can say is it's going to be great.
Chris, I know you've been working on some stuff as well.
Yeah, I have a show you can actually screen on PBS. Is a documentary I directed. I've often edited documentaries. This is the first one I've directed. So I used my editing experience and made my own film. And it's a half-hour documentary called SoCal Snowy Owl. And it's a story of a rare snowy owl that showed up in Southern California. It was a 100-year experience, and it brought this community unexpectedly together. So it's a feel-good story. So I hope you can go find it and screen it. And we had a lot of fun making it and showing it to people.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Something different.
On that note, guys, we're going to call it a wrap. It was great having you, Eric. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate talking to you. It was a lot of fun.
Eric, thank you so much. It was great. I hope people listen to this and learn, editors can learn a lot from this. So thank you for sharing all that.
Thank you.
Listeners, I love your feedback. You'll find my contact info on our website, belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find more than 260 past episodes. So if you're a new listener, check out the catalog. My closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. If you're a fan of Below the Line, consider a purchase. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Other ways you can help. First, give us a positive rating wherever you get your podcast. Second, tell your friends about an episode you enjoyed, because that's how we gain new listeners. All of that aside, whatever your engagement, the fact that you're still listening means a lot to me. Thanks again from Below the Line.